All right. Well, thank you for coming. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm Mark Vopat. In my other life, in my day life, I'm a professor of philosophy at Youngstown State University. So I've been at Youngstown State for about 22 years, or more now. I don't like to date myself too much like that, but 22 or so years at Youngstown State. I'm also the president of the YSU OEA, which is the Ohio Education Association, the union out of Youngstown State. So I'm here obviously to talk about SB1, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the referendum. My colleague, Dr. Amanda Feldbaum, who's in sociology, and Dr. Krishana Jackson-Leftwich, who is in political science. So these are the other co-organizers of this. To give you a little background, our union was very much opposed, as most of the faculty unions were across Ohio, to SB1 when it was proposed. So this is actually a reworking of a bill, SB 83, which you might have heard about from a couple of years ago. Senator Jerry Serino proposed it. The bill never made it to a vote in the House or Senate. Prior to that, some of the provisions in this bill were in SB 5. So if you remember the anti-union bill from several years ago, which had a number of things with workers' right, the right to strike, what you could negotiate on, all that was in SB 5. Some of that has now been moved into SB 1. So SB1 is sort of the culmination of these sort of education / anti-union kind of bills. When the bill was going through the process, as I said, we sent testimony down to Columbus. We had people down there giving testimony, well, some of them tried to give testimony. There was so much opposition that many people were unable to actually present. When the bill went through, though, ultimately, and DeWine signed it, I went to my union and said, we need to do something about this. And Mandy Feldbaum, along with me, also was saying the same thing. We said, we need to start a referendum. We need to get this bill. We need to pull this bill back. So we initially started this not as something that YSU was going to do, as our union was going to do alone, but as a means of getting the ball rolling, getting other groups and organizations involved with this. So we said, if no one's going to do this, we look to the unions. Unfortunately, they, for various reasons, were unable or unwilling to do it. So we decided we would just take and start doing it. So what happened was we went out, we actually got petitions. We sent them to people who simply volunteered, a few hundred people who volunteered, and they printed them up on their own dime. And we needed 2,000 signatures. We needed 1,000 to actually get it approved. Only 1,000 had to be good. We were hoping for 2,000 signatures so that we'd make sure we have some buffer. We ended up with over 6,000 signatures in a matter of about 10 days. So we could see that there was a lot of opposition to the bill. It was sort of heartening to see this, and since then, it's sort of blown up as far as volunteers have gone. So I think we're at somewhere over 2,000 individual volunteers, plus a number of organizations have now come on board to help with this. So that's the sort of backdrop of what's going on. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about what's wrong with SB1, what specifically do we object to. So just to give you some sort of a backdrop for all of this, I think we're seeing this sort of trend of opposing higher education at all levels, coming from the federal level on down. So you're probably following there's not a whole lot about YSU and the president going after YSU of the United States, but there's definitely about Harvard, right? We've seen all of what they want to do with Harvard, go in, sort of micromanage how Harvard works and how actually many of the universities work in the United States. So this one always gets me. The professors are the enemy. So this is where we're starting on the federal level. Senator Jerry Serino, who also seems to have a problem with what we do in the classroom, or what he perceives that we do in the classroom, he wants us to know that the faculty need to wake up and understand that the students they teach are their customers. Well, my response to Senator Serino is that no, they're not my customer, they're my students. And that there is a fundamental difference between a customer and a student. He's also said that the faculty don't run the universities, the trustees do. Point of fact, all universities are actually run by both the faculty and the administration. It's called something called shared governance, which our state senator doesn't actually like. So the idea of shared governance is that there are subject matter experts, that there are people who have trained for many years to teach at a university, and they're the ones best to decide what happens in their classroom. And what this bill does is actually, as I'll talk about, actually takes that and flips it and makes it something that both the state and the trustees are the ones who determine what goes on in the classroom. So that's part of the opposition I have. So SB1, one other thing I should point out is that part of this also, the claim is that we are havens of indoctrination, that I am indoctrinating my students at the university. I wish I could indoctrinate my universities. I have a hard enough time getting them to actually do the reading every week. I don't have a lot of time to indoctrinate them in anything. Right? So the truth is, this is not what's going on. They like to cite statistics about how liberal professors are. That's true. Professors tend to be more liberal at the universities than in the general public. But what Senator Serino, who's pointed this out over and over again, has given no evidence that, for example, the physics professor is liberal in their teaching of physics. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means for the economics professor to be liberal in their economics teaching. We have economists, physicists, geologists. We have all of these individuals who are professionals who teach the material that they are set to teach. They're not engaged in indoctrination, and no evidence has been given that they are. In fact, my own university president recently, when asked the question, said, our professors do a good job of presenting all sides of an argument. And so basically saying, we don't actually engage in this at YSU. And I would be interested to see what other universities that presidents have to say about their faculty as well. So this bill is in part about ideology. It's an ideology coming out of Columbus, where what they really want is to run the universities as a business, where the university faculty are at-will employees, students are the product, and education equals workforce development only. That the whole point of going to college is simply to a one-to-one correlation with a job, and any subject that doesn't have a one-to-one correlation actually has no value, as we've seen at the University of Toledo. That's already, based on this bill, getting rid of programs that they don't deem as having value, like philosophy and certain Africana studies, women's studies, other schools with low enrollments things that they have deemed not necessary to offer students, things like physics. So this is really a government intrusion into higher education in a way that's sort of unprecedented. So what is SB1? SB1, as you know, is a law that targets colleges and universities, their faculty, and actually students. It attacks diversity, equity, inclusion. It attacks workers' rights, and it's a form of censorship in the classroom, as I will talk about as well. So the workers' rights aspect, I think there's been some attention to this. One of the things that this bill does is ban faculty from striking. So one of the attacks is on the strike. The claim is that students and their parents are paying the university, so why should faculty be allowed to strike to interfere with that contract? That the parents and students have a contract with the university, faculty should not be able to influence that at all, disrupt that contract. That's fair, and maybe if strikes were a major problem in Ohio, that would be something we should be concerned about. But in the last 25 years, using YSU as an example, we have had 3 strike days in 25 years. 2 of those strike days happened on days we weren't teaching classes. The university was not actually in class at that point. We were on contract, but we're not teaching. So we've actually had 1 strike day that affected students in 25 years. My students have had more snow days in the last year than we've had strike days. So one, it seems that there really is no problem. Now there is one university, Wright State, that did have a strike that lasted about 10 days. The students were either compensated, or they were given accelerated classes, or they extended the school year to make sure that the students got the material they needed. No students were affected in their graduation. So one, it sort of rings hollow that the strike is something that's actually super disruptive to students. And 2, as I said, we actually give more calamity days or snow days than we've had strikes in Ohio. The second thing this does is not allow us to negotiate on our terms of tenure. Tenure essentially is gone in Ohio if SB1 stands. There are no more tenured professors because tenure now becomes a board policy, which means the board of trustees at each university can simply decide what counts for tenure and what doesn't. There's no negotiation, there's no protection, there's no stipulation of what is tenure, isn't tenure, they just simply get to decide. What's also pulled out of this is our right to negotiate on the terms of retrenchment or the firing of faculty. So retrenchment is something that does happen. Unlike what a lot of the proponents of the bill will tell you, is that professors have lifetime appointments and jobs, they can never be fired. Actually, it's just a lie. I'm not even going to mince words. That's a lie. I've had over 30 colleagues have been fired from the university over the last 5 or 6 years that I'm at. As part of the downsizing of programs, getting rid of faculty can be gotten rid of. The way in which they are removed from the university is what we can negotiate. So to give you an example, at my university right now, prior to SB1, if they close down my philosophy program, they can't fire me if there are enough classes for me to teach to keep full-time employment. So for example, as philosophy professor, I teach business ethics, engineering ethics, criminal justice ethics, critical thinking, intro to philosophy, all those classes. If those classes are still offered at the university and those classes fill, then they have to keep me. They can't fire me and replace me with part-time people or with contract employees, long-term contract employees. That's a protection for me, and it's because the work is still there. What this bill does now, what it says now is, if they get rid of a program, in fact, I can't even negotiate, I don't know what it's going to say, but they could simply replace me. They could simply close the program down and say, yes, we have 40 classes a semester that need teaching in philosophy, but we're no longer going to employ you. We're going to bring in part-time people. Or we'll offer you some kind of contract work. So this is an attack on workers' rights. It's to make it more like a business. If you need to downsize one department to put resources in others, you can do that, and you don't have to keep those employees. So SB1 is, by all accounts, an attack on workers' rights. Now, part of why we're concerned about this is not only self-interest, and I will admit 100% that I think this is self-interest. I also think it's just that you keep people who are doing work. If there's work for them to do, you shouldn't be able to simply get rid of them. But it also is going to make it difficult to attract and retain quality faculty in Ohio. If I look at Ohio and I look at Pennsylvania, or Ohio and I look at Michigan, and I'm a young academic who's coming out looking for a job, I'm not going to go to a place where my work isn't protected, where my job isn't protected. Those coming to Ohio now, it's going to be a lot harder to make the case. We've already seen in Florida that the number of applications for jobs at universities in Florida have gone down dramatically, mainly because they have already eliminated these sorts of protections. The minute you say, and by the way, I should let you know that the claim that you don't get evaluated as a tenured faculty member is also false. We've been evaluated at our university for at least 40 years. So even after tenure, you still have to maintain the quality of your work. You have to do research, you have to do service, you have to have your teaching evaluations and teaching activities are all evaluated by the university. And there are grounds for removing people who aren't keeping up with those things. So there isn't in this, what this bill does is say that we have no say in what those terms or conditions are. And that's going to make it difficult to keep those faculty. Also, that is going to make it more difficult, or at least it's going to lower the quality of education in Ohio, in higher ed. Which students, again, when students look at the quality of the education they're getting, where are they going to go? They're going to go where they're getting the best education, the best professors, and our concern is going to be that students are going to look elsewhere and not in Ohio for their education. Now, just so some numbers and just know how much that could impact us. Once you remove tenure, once you remove those protections, as faculty decide to move to other states, or we can't attract new faculty, just to let you know that Ohio's universities contribute about $68.9 billion, almost $69 billion to Ohio's economy. That's in the university, in buildings, in students, all of the side sort of things, students spending money in the economy, the universities as generators of economic growth, when they development of products, new businesses that stem from our universities. Even at a school as small as Youngstown, many of our graduates have actually started businesses in Youngstown, which can desperately use new businesses. So a lot of our computer science students have actually started businesses right in downtown Youngstown using the Youngstown Incubator. So this is an economic driver. As that quality goes down, as you can't attract that faculty, you're going to see a decrease there as well. International students, when deciding on where to go to school, international students bring in $1.3 billion in Ohio. This should be concerning both on the state level and on the national level. We're seeing the review of students and student visas and the suspension of their visa applications. Because this is a huge economic driver for Ohio. So SB1 is about workers' rights, and it is about the things that I'm concerned about as a faculty member, but it also can have an economic impact if we allow this to stand. The other area, and this is getting into now sort of more philosophical notions of what a university is that SB1 removes universities' faculty ability to teach relevant and necessary concepts. It actually states in the bill things that are what they call controversial topics that we have to leave the students open to. So things like marriage and what are the entire list? Things that are controversial are elections, marriage, economics. No, not economics. There's a list of these. I forget the entire list. But it is about supposedly giving all sides of an argument, right? What they're saying is we need viewpoint diversity. We want to make sure that all sides of an issue, students should come to their own conclusions about that. We shouldn't actually attempt to make them come to one conclusion or another. And I will agree, as a philosophy professor, I do this quite a bit in my classes. I present students with both sides of an argument, whether it's ethics or philosophic topics. But I'm not sure that the requirement be that I need to entertain things like the Holocaust didn't happen, and that I need to take class time to allow the student to come to their own conclusion as to whether the Holocaust actually happened if I'm a history professor. I don't know if I should have my students have to come to their own conclusion whether, I don't know, slavery was good because at least it taught the slaves some skills. These are positions now that I am actually legally required to spend time talking, discussing, and allowing students to come to their own conclusions. Now, in some cases, maybe it isn't going to be that big a deal. I give them 2 or 3 minutes, but also in this bill, as part of this, is a requirement that students or that we have an evaluation in which the students can tell, did they offer a fair and balanced presentation in the class? If I dismiss, or it seems that I'm dismissing, slavery is good or the Holocaust didn't happen, then the student can actually file a grievance against me. And that becomes part of my evaluation. It becomes, now I have to go through a process where I would actually have to defend my class or my classroom or those positions outside of class. Now, personally, I don't think that's going to be a problem for me, but I also know that this is an incredible waste of resources and time and money in actually going through this. We've already seen in Indiana, I believe, I just read an article where they had something in the order of 100+ complaints because they have a similar system that they recently put in place. It turns out about 9 of them had any merit. And by the way, we already have systems in place if students believe that they're being treated unfairly or that their views aren't being respected. These already exist. What this bill does now, it takes it to the next level. So part of this is a censorship issue with both sides, right? And those both sides will influence or will require that faculty censor themselves in certain ways. Because now I have to be worried, am I offending the student? Am I going to get a bad review? Are they going to bring me up on a grievance charge because I've said something like, well, the 2020 election, who won? Is there any evidence to the contrary? No. But if I tell a student in my political science class that, well, Biden won the election, I've now treaded on a controversial topic which I have to let the student come to their own conclusion on. Even though there is a fact of the matter on this. Right? This is not, it's not something that's actually, it's controversial for some. Climate policy, I have a colleague who teaches the economics of climate change. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. I found out this not too long ago. It turns out insurance companies are now hiring climatologists to figure out the rates, insurance rates for different parts of the country. Why? Okay, this is controversial. Climate change is causing different weather patterns, which are now putting insurance companies at more risk or more liability in certain regions. When the insurance companies start hiring climatologists, I think it's time for people to acknowledge that maybe there's something going on with the climate. Because and this is a business interest, right? This is completely economic. I don't think they'd waste money on climatologists unless they actually thought that there was something to this. So I have a friend who teaches that topic. Can the student come into class and say, I disagree. There is no economic impact based on climate change. And you can't grade me down for that. Well, I'm like, well, that would make certain classes almost impossible. This is part of the censorship that we're seeing. And the consequences that I see with this or that we have this is the restrictions in the classroom, the self-censorship in the classroom, and I think this also decreases the quality of what happens, the quality of higher education. This is obviously all part and parcel of a bigger issue, and that's state overreach in higher ed. We're seeing the state overreach at the federal level. Now I think a lot of that has trickled down. For those who don't know also, this bill that purports to fix this problem we're seeing in higher ed comes from the National Association of Scholars. Sounds like a very official group. The National Association of Scholars is actually a highly conservative think tank that actually puts out the language of the bill on their website. So what happened in Ohio is that the Ohio legislators went to that site and actually lifted, if they were in my class, we'd call it plagiarism, but we don't go there. They lifted the text of that bill, that the proposed legislation, and brought it into the Ohio bill. In fact, on the National Association of Scholars website, they thank the Ohio legislators for using, this is the most that their legislation that they posted has been used in any bill in the country. So various states have taken parts of this bill to use it in their own higher ed bills. The National Association of Scholars thanked ours for taking the majority of what they had posted there and putting it into SB1. So this really is a state overreach. Universities and their faculty, when you start to get down to what I can teach in my class, what topics I have to cover, saying that we actually have, part of this bill is also the requirement that we teach a civics class. Okay, we have civics classes at YSU, all universities do. This bill now tells us what has to be in the content of that class. We have to teach the Declaration, we have to teach the Constitution, fine. We have to teach capitalism. We have to teach Adam Smith. We have to teach, letter from a Birmingham jail, want to balance things out. And then we have to teach some of the Federalist Papers, the ones that they like. This is all part of what's being proposed. So this is the first time the state has ever come through and said, not that you have to teach history or music or art or whatever. This is the first time the state has actually come down and said, you have to teach this civics class. Every student has to take it, which causes increased time to graduation or the elimination of something else for them to take this class. But also hiring a faculty to cover all these classes. We don't have the faculty to cover enough of these classes. So we've got roughly 11,000, almost 12,000 students, I think, now at YSU. We would need to have over 2,000 students per semester. 3,000 students per semester would have to be, or close to that, 1,500, taking these classes. That's an immense amount of teaching to be done, and we just don't have the faculty now. So we're going to have to hire a number of part-time faculty. It's going to increase costs for the university. So this is a problem, but also the content of that class is being regulated by the state. And that's something we've never seen before. We've never seen the state come in. They also, a provision of this is that a mandatory elimination of programs that don't have a certain number of graduates. It's an average of 5 per year over a 3-year period. Now again, that sounds good. At times you say, well, if you have very few majors, then why should you keep that program going? But to give you an example, there are some programs like physics, which have been eliminated from Akron. I believe Toledo was another one that's looking at eliminating physics and around. You say, well, okay, if there aren't a lot of physics majors, why should we have a physics degree? The thing is, as I mentioned before, a lot of those physicists are teaching all of the engineering students physics. So you're not gaining any money, you're just losing opportunity for students. So they're not getting rid of the faculty. It looks like they're doing savings, right? We're closing a program. You would think that saves money. It doesn't. We still need the physicists to teach all the engineering students, the computer science students. So if they're already teaching those students, why does it hurt, or how would it hurt to not have a small number of physics majors as well? That means opportunity for students who might not be able to get opportunity. At YSU, we attract a lot of students from the Valley, the Mahoning Valley. These are students that can't afford to go somewhere else. They have family commitments. Some of them are helping out with their families. Some have children, are coming back to school. They don't have the luxury of going to Ohio State if they want to study physics, or to Cincinnati. So we can offer them physics. They can get a degree at our university without having to travel, and it doesn't cost us any more. It just might be the case that we have a small number of graduates. But the state of Ohio has now said, no, we're going to make the decision for you. It doesn't matter whether this is a viable program. You still need those instructors. You could still have the major. We are just saying, you're going to cut. And it's going to be by law. Now there's an appeals process, although we still don't know what that appeals process is yet. So there are a number of these you could point to programs like this. I have a philosophy major. I'm one of the few philosophers on campus now. We have 2 part-time and myself. They're full-time people, but they're doing other jobs as well at the university. I have over 30 majors. And so it seems that even if you said, well, there's not a lot of majors, if you got rid of that program, well, you still have me. You still got the other professors teaching, and we still have to offer all those other classes. Why not offer the major as well? That's an opportunity for students. The minute you start lowering the opportunity, that means students start to look elsewhere to go to school. They're not coming to Ohio if they can't get the program. When my son, who started at Kent State this fall, my daughter's finishing her graduate degree. My son started at Kent State, and when he was looking at schools, one of the things I did looking at other schools out of state was to ask, how diverse a selection of majors are there? Because I don't know, maybe many of you, those of you who went to university, I don't know if you changed your major. I know I changed my major. I was an engineering major before I went into philosophy, much to the dismay of my family. My parents were very sad that day. I came home and told them I was not going to be an engineer. What do you, electrical engineering? And I came home one day, I told them, I don't think it's going to be engineering. They thought it would be math or something like that. And I came home one day and I said, I found my major. And they said, what is it? I said, well, I've been in this class for 2 weeks and I haven't read a primary source yet, but I'm going to be a philosophy major. Mom, there's a tear came down her eye. And, my dad had nothing to say. He was a history major, so he said, okay, he wasn't doing anything. But he said, what are you going to do with that? And I said, I don't know. Maybe I'll go to grad school. But the point is, I had options. When I left engineering, it wasn't engineering or business. It wasn't engineering or computer science. It was engineering and I was at Cleveland State. It was engineering. It was history. It was sociology. It was anthropology. I could have gone into physics. I could have gone into math. I could go into business. There were options for me. And that's what I appreciated about my university. When my son went to school, I told him, you're not going to a school where if you decide to change your major, you're going to be pigeonholed into one of these 2 other areas or 3 other areas. I said, I want you to have opportunity. And that's what attracted him. He's now at Kent State. There was he actually was undeclared going in. He's sort of on the border of being declared. And I'm like, this is good. You have a whole range of opportunities. And I think what we don't want to see in Ohio is administrators telling us what they actually think is good for the university. I think that's why we have universities, why we have university presidents and boards and provosts and faculty to sort of regionally decide what's good for the region and what the needs are of each of the universities. Finally, part of this is the state overreach is that they are now mandating that we look at 3-year degrees, 3-year bachelor's degrees in Ohio. So part of the provision of this bill is to take a 4-year degree. You don't need 4 years. Why 4 years? What's the magic number with 4 years? Let's push it down to 3 years. So now you have a 3-year degree. And we're all mandated now to look at converting programs from 4 years into 3 years. Now, there's a lot of concerns with this. I have concerns right off the bat. One, my view, and maybe this is idealistic, is that part of higher ed going into university is to expand students' horizons. We're not here as technical training. I think there are valuable technical schools. And if a student wants technical training, then they go to a technical school. But part of a university training is to give you a broad range of knowledge, make you aware of a broad range of subjects. Dropping down to 3 years is basically saying we don't care about that. What we really care about is getting you in and out the door so you can get into the workforce. And that's fine. Part of our job is to prepare you for the workforce. But also part of our job is to make you a well-rounded citizen ready for sort of advanced citizenship. That you have a whole diverse level of experiences, that you have sort of a background, background knowledge that you can take into any field that you go into. And what this really is doing is now taking us and making us into job training centers. On top of this, there is a real concern whether law schools, graduate schools, medical schools will recognize a 3-year degree as valuable or have the same distinction that a 4-year degree does. When I went to graduate school in Canada. When I was in Canada, they had a 3-year degree. And students would come to me. I actually had a student who was on a 3-year program came to me for a letter of recommendation when I was a grad student. And I said, why are you coming to me for a letter of recommendation? He said, because you're the only arts class I took at the university. Because on the 3-year degree program, there were almost no electives. You didn't have to take philosophy or these, so you had to take one class as part of it. He said, you're my only, I said, you took logic with me. Wasn't he? He goes, that counts. But they actually got rid of the 3-year program because most students started to take what they called an honors degree and did 4 years because it allowed them to get into medical schools, graduate schools, and employers looked more favorably on a 4-year degree than the Canadian 3-year degree. And so eventually Canada eliminated it across the provinces. They decided, now part of that they had grade 13, so they had this sort of weird kind of in between, you're not quite college, but you're not quite high school. But even with that, most students who took grade 13 in Ontario still ended up taking a 4-year degree because it carried more prestige for them going into their business, going into graduate school. So there's a real concern, again, whether the quality of this is going to sort of degrade the degrees from Ohio when you start offering these 3-year degrees. So as I mentioned already, it limits opportunities for students, this bill, by shutting down programs, mandatory programs, even when it doesn't make sense to do so. The question of the 3-year degree, whether this is valuable. Decision-making by universities. A lot of our state universities, as you probably know, really do sort of programs for the regions in which they're in. So if they see there's a deficit, so for example, out at Youngstown State, we have dental hygiene program. And we have a nearly 100, I think it's a 100% placement of all our dental hygiene students. When they finish the 4-year program, get their dental hygiene degree, they get jobs. My dental hygienist, I found out, was from Youngstown State, graduated from Youngstown State when I went and got there. Now, the problem is the dental hygiene program is a very expensive program, and sometimes it operates at a loss. But universities aren't businesses, they're nonprofits. So yes, the dental hygiene program can operate at a little bit of a loss, but the business school has a lot more. So we just take and say, well, it balances off. And those students have opportunities and get jobs and are in the community, stay in Ohio and work in the community and pay taxes in our communities. This is a good program. So do we get rid of it because it has a small number of graduates? Do we get rid of it because it costs a little bit more? It barely breaks even at times, but it actually has an incredible job placement record. So how should we be running the university? If it's a business, cut that section off. It's not making us money. If I'm running this as an institute of higher education where it's supposed to be a social good, I might say, yes, it's true, it's running at a deficit, but we have other areas of the university that compensate for it. Same thing with art and music. My grandfather was a music teacher. Everybody know music and art, what got me through the pandemic, as much as the technology was valuable to me, to be able to teach online and do those things, what got me through the pandemic were the books on my shelf, was the music that I listened to, was by Netflix at night when I wanted to forget about what was going on in the world. Those things have value, but guess what? We don't often get a lot of graduates, or I can't give you a one-to-one where they're going to get work. But those are valuable things. But if it's a business, I get rid of it. Now, don't get me started on how much we spend on our athletic program with the 500 students that actually runs in a $9 million loss every year. Because nobody in Columbus is talking about that. And Ohio State is the only school in the state of Ohio that makes money on its athletic program, that actually contributes back to the university. The only one. And you can, this is NCAA mandatory reporting. Every university loses. In fact, every student in Ohio pays somewhere upwards of $1,000, $1,200 a year to maintain their athletic program, except for Ohio State where it makes money. So my students are actually taking money out of the pockets of my students, who most of them work 20 and 30 hours a week, and we're going to take $1,000 of your tuition that could go back to you. We're going to use that to support the athletic program. But we don't talk about that. What we talk about is this is a business, and as a business, we need to cut here, we need to redistribute wealth. What this does is not allow, what SB1 does is actually just amount to a government intrusion, a micromanaging the university, and only micromanaging in the areas that they think, that they know best about, right? They don't want to really look at how the entire university is. One thing I want to mention, Kent State, the president of Kent State, one of the few presidents who's actually talked about SB1, mentioned in an interview just a couple of months ago that they estimate it's going to cost $1.5 to $2 million to comply with SB1. Because there's a number of, this bill is huge. I wish I could tell you all the details, but when it comes to compliance, posting of syllabi, evaluation of faculty, all of the things that they need to do to comply with this bill, it's going to cost them $1.5 to $2 million, which means for a school like YSU, it's probably closer to $750,000 to $1 million for us. Ohio State, it would probably be double or triple that in their budget, just to comply with what SB1 is asking, with their mandatory reporting that's going to be that is part of this bill. The last thing I want to talk about is a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. One thing we should note is that when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we shouldn't think of this as affirmative action. These are two very different things. Diversity, equity, and inclusion at a university is something like the training that we get to deal with veterans who have PTSD. Sensitivity training for veterans is a form of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Under this bill, technically, that really isn't something we should do. And that's a group that is a not protected class. Military veterans are not a protected class, so it doesn't fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Why should I have, or why should faculty be offered training to be sensitive to military people who are coming back to school? This means that voluntary training for LGBTQ students. So I have a number of students. I had training that went on, I took, it's got to be almost 15 years ago now, about LGBTQ students. What's the training, sensitivity training? It wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary. And what it allows me to do is go to a training where I learn about what challenges these students might face when they come to university. When they first come out to their families, being rejected by family, dealing with all kinds of issues with what happens when you sort of make that transition from high school to college as someone who's in one of those groups. There's a little sign on my door that says a student can come to me and say, if they want to talk and they say, I've got an issue with what's going on in my class, I've missed some of your classes, but they want to be sure that they can safely tell me why. And they say, well, my family threw me out. I came out to my parents and now my family threw me out. I had some problems in a relationship. They can talk to me. And I have a little sticker on my door. One, there's a question now whether I can keep that sticker on my door, even though the training is and the training itself is now barred by the university. So to make students feel more welcome, there's training for dealing with students of different religions coming from different countries. Our international students, the 1.3 billion that bring of those, or 1.7 billion of the money they bring to Ohio. These students come from different countries. This semester I taught a graduate class with a number of students who came from India. And they have a different notion of higher ed. Their experiences as graduate students, it's shocking for them to, for example, actually go to a professor for help. They don't do that. That's not the way it works. Questioning professors. I encourage my students to question me constantly. Come at me. You don't like that view I just expressed? All right, give me your view. Give me a better one. Tell me where I went wrong. These students don't understand that. In fact, a lot of them would sit there. I was in class. I said, why aren't you objecting to that? You believe that? They're like, no. And I go, are you allowed to do this in your? We don't really talk to our professors like that. We don't object to what they say. We don't challenge or question. It's a different thing. So you know what? It would have been helpful for me to have training for that at the university. But they're not a protected group. That's DEI. When you're making a welcoming environment, that's DEI. DEI are scholarships for women to go into engineering. DEI are scholarships for racial or ethnic minorities. When I went to school, I got a scholarship because apparently I am of Czech descent. And there was a Czechoslovak society that my grandfather was a part of. It says, putting you in for this scholarship. I got a scholarship because I was Czech. Okay, I don't find that particularly offensive. And for all those who have scholarships at YSU for Italian descent, for women, for minorities, these are things that we've done for years and years to help students, and those things are now gone under this bill. We are no longer allowed to offer those. Any scholarships that are currently there, we can still give. Any scholarship that requires additional funding can't get that funding. So our foundation, if they're accepting money to sort of fill up the coffers of that scholarship, they're no longer allowed to accept those. They have to let the scholarship run out. And anyone who comes to the university saying, I want to establish a new scholarship, they're not allowed unless that scholarship is open to all students. So it's actually taking resources away. I heard recently that students at my university were also denied scholarships that they could have received because the university is now afraid of running afoul of SB1. So they actually had scholarships in existence it was a scholarship for women and minorities in business, and they actually did not disperse the scholarship. They just didn't offer it to the students this year. So it was money that was left on the table that could have been used by our students. And that was all because they were concerned about it running afoul of the DEI part of this law. So while I understand there are people who have legitimate concerns about diversity, equity, and inclusion and what that means, this bill does not even define what diversity, equity, and inclusion are. It doesn't even tell us what it is. So the things that I view as diversity are the things that I just told you. Voluntary sensitivity training, scholarships that might target certain groups, those sorts of things. And many of those are privately funded anyway. These aren't even the university dispersing it. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not taking from one student to another. It's people outside of the university who said, I want to support this group. I want to encourage more women here, more men in nursing. You could have a scholarship that said, here's a scholarship for men going into nursing, because we all know nurses are woefully underrepresented. Male nurses are woefully underrepresented. On the other hand, we also know that women and minorities are really underrepresented in the STEM fields, particularly engineering. Even at my university, where we have a lot, it's still really bad. But we can no longer attempt to encourage women. We can't have STEM days for high school girls at our university anymore. So you invite them to campus and say, you can go into STEM. Here's the career paths you could do in STEM. We're no longer allowed to do that because of this bill, which was also a way that we generated interest in our university and upped our enrollments. So there's a practical part of this as well, right? You get, not only was it about the diversity end, but it was also about getting more students onto our campus. So we're no longer allowed to do that. This is all part of diversity, equity, inclusion. So the consequences of SB1 is that it's taking resources away from students. Whether it's resources to make them feel more welcome, whether it's to help faculty better deal with students from different backgrounds, whether it's military background or international or LGBTQ or whatever it is. And by the way, at all of these universities, this was all voluntary. These weren't mandated sensitivity training. This was just all voluntary things that we could offer as a part of making our students feel more included, to get them through, which also helps them get through in the 4 years, as opposed to the 6 that a lot of universities are averaging for the bachelor's degree. So this creates a less inviting and inclusive atmosphere for students. It drives students out of state. Again, if I can't offer a scholarship that somebody else is going to offer, they're going to go where the money is. I know that would be my concern. As an undergrad, I went right to Cleveland State. I didn't know if I wanted to go away. This wasn't an issue for me, but it definitely became an issue when it was graduate school. Who was going to offer me the money? Where was I going to get the scholarship money? How was I going to pay for my education? And when you start doing that, you start eliminating those sorts of things because of a bill like this. That means students are going to look elsewhere. This also affected, by the way, medical students. So we have for the referendum, we have a Substack newsletter that I've been sending out. I had a medical student from Ohio State Medical who wrote a fantastic article, but also mentioned in her article how the scholarships that she received and the other minority students at the medical schools really helped them, because most of them are coming from backgrounds where they don't have family who went to college, who don't have background, they're first generation college students who are struggling to pay for medical school. And if you thought undergrad was expensive, the cost of medical school plus living on campus, all of those things, astronomical price tags. So now we're actually saying to students, don't come to Ohio to go to medical school, go somewhere else, because they're going to offer you the money that we're no longer legally allowed to offer. These scholarships, even if we're not actually paying for them at the university, even if these are privately endowed. So you can have a scholarship. Now, one of the issues, and I should be clear, yes, you can take scholarships from outside organizations. The university can just not make you aware of them. So even if they exist, we cannot facilitate the scholarships ourselves. So you have to find them somewhere out there. Right now, what happens at most universities, including my own, is that students every year, after they fill out their FAFSA, they can go to the website of our foundation and say, here are all the different scholarships you can apply for. So they're listed there, and they tell them what they need or what criteria are. They can even apply for a bunch of them online. Kent State has a similar system, I know, because of my son. Now, any scholarship that is banned by DEI, by the DEI ban, those scholarships won't appear. Students don't know they exist. So somehow they have to find those out somewhere in the community. They have to figure out where those are, find that money, apply for them, and then that money has to be distributed by an outside group. Where it works now, up until SB1's passage, is that money could go right into a foundation so that students knew the money was there, automatically goes into their account. All of that paperwork, all that red tape was sort of limited in a good way, right? They limited all that red tape so that students could get the money. So there is really an issue of whether or not this is going to drive students away, right? Another one, I've been contacted by medical faculty in Ohio. The medical teachers from the neonatology department down at one of the hospitals down in Columbus. And the faculty, or the doctors there, are also faculty members at the medical school. And they contacted me, and the representative, a number of doctors, 30 or 40 doctors, he said, was that they noted the importance of DEI training for their doctors. because doctors deal with diverse communities and they need to understand how to deal with those, whether it's the aging community, whether it's immigrant communities, different immigrant communities, religious communities. There's different, I mean, I teach bioethics. And when I've taught bioethics in the past, part of it is how do you deal with communities like Orthodox Jewish communities when it comes to medical care? How do you deal with Muslim communities or Buddhist communities? So it's not just, again, when we think of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we shouldn't be thinking of this as, oh, it's affirmative action. Some of this is, there are different groups with different needs. And so those needs, to be a good doctor, you need to know how to navigate those. And so this bill actually says, unless there is an absolute need, in other words, if it's a matter of accreditation for your college, or there's some kind of grant, if there's money involved, the state is more than happy to let you to say, oh, do all the DEI you need to do. There's money. So if it's a grant or something, fine. But if you want this as part of your program, if this is a mandatory part of doctors' training, it can't be anymore, because we've now eliminated that. So to wrap this all up, I've been talking for a while now. Sorry about that. See, I'm in professor mode. How can you help? Well, obviously I'm here because we have this petition drive that we're doing, the referendum. So our hope is that we are going to be able to get the number of signatures to get on the ballot a referendum where we can pull this bill back. So since the governor has already signed it, part of what we're asking for now is people to get signatures. Now I put the donation on here. I'm going to be honest with you. At one point, the donation was important, or maybe more important, because we need to print our petitions. We still need some money for that, but right now our huge concern is just getting the signatures, just getting the number of signatures that we need. And if we can do that and get it on the ballot, I think that if we can take this case to the voters of Ohio, much like SB5, when they try to pass this, I think this is, a lot of people are going to see that this is just bad. It's bad for students. It's bad for faculty. It's bad for the universities in Ohio. And so our hope is that we can stop this, because coming down the pike, if you don't see it now, there are a number of other worker bills. So there's a new bill, SB8, which is banning all workers in Ohio from negotiating over any kind of release time for union activities. So if you're a shop steward, or if you're a grievance person at a university, you have to do that on your own time, on your own dime. And you can't negotiate over that anymore. The budget bill for education, K through 12 education, is just horrendous in Ohio right now, what they're doing in the public schools. So there are a number of education issues coming up. Our view is, if we don't start drawing a line in the sand and saying, you can't do this. We value higher ed in Ohio. We value K through 12 education. I've been a lifelong disappointed Browns fan. But $600 million for a stadium that we don't need. 25 years ago, we built one on the lake. I don't understand why we need a new one, but there's $600 million that we're willing to put into a stadium that will not pay back. And yet we're cutting education and we're looking at destroying higher education for, quite honestly, the only thing I think of is ideological grounds. So I'm just asking for anyone who can help to please sign a petition. We have petitions here. If you'd like to help distribute petitions with your groups, as an individual, we're always looking for people to help the gathering of signatures. So donation to finish up our costs and printing up the last of our petitions and some incidentals, but also our website where you can find out where to sign the petition or to volunteer or to help out. So thank you very much for your time, and that's all I have, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
It sounds like the local economic impact would be huge with this. So regardless, if you have a family member, everybody going to college or higher university or whatever, if they don't want to come to Ohio and they keep reducing, then that's going to affect the local economy, because you're not going to have people opening businesses, purchasing whatever from the local community. So it sounds like it could have a large economic impact on the local area.
It definitely will. I mean, Youngstown, and I speak to Youngstown, even Akron to degrees. I live in Akron, I teach in Youngstown. The universities are some of these sort of core economic drivers. So Youngstown, for years, the university has supported the surrounding area. So the businesses around the campus the food businesses. Now we've expanded to housing, so there's a lot of independently run apartment complexes, completely dependent on students. If we start losing students, we start losing international students. If students start going to Pennsylvania. So I have a graduate of my program who was looking at graduate school, and she was looking in Ohio until SB1 came along and said, you know what, I don't want to be in this state anymore. I don't want to be, I'm going to go look at Pennsylvania. So she moved to Pittsburgh, and she's going to be looking to go to graduate school in Pittsburgh. She had thought about Ohio, but then when this can't, so what happened? She's no longer renting the apartment that she was renting in Youngstown. She's no longer staying in the region. She's no longer paying taxes. She's not going out to the restaurant. So yeah, all of this is going to, the more we shrink higher ed, I mean, Columbus, again, Ohio State, I can't even imagine how much of a business generator Ohio State is. I was on the campus just a couple of weeks ago, and the size of that campus with all the surrounding businesses, with all the housing and the rental properties and the bars and the restaurants and the bookstores and everything that's down there, this would be huge. And again, the more that we make education in Ohio look bad, the less likely that students are going to come here, and that's just going to shrink the economy. I mean, I also know that part of this, again, with some of the scholarship incentives and some of the things that we're doing, when a student comes to Ohio and ends up going, most universities now have a lot of internship programs. I had a nephew who went to school in Chicago, never came back. Because after his first year up there, he came home for a summer, then he got a job, then he got an internship. Next thing you know, he's got a job in Chicago, he's staying in Chicago. And the reverse happens here. We get people who come into Ohio, and they go to Ohio State or they go to Kent State, and you say, wait, where are you from? And I say, oh, well, I was from Michigan, or I was from Kentucky, or I was from Tennessee. And then I went to school here, but I got an internship, and the internship turned into a job, and then I ended up settling down here. And then I had a family, and by that time I wasn't going to move back, and we were all established. So all of those things are part of the education system. I think Ohio is exceptional compared to many other states because of this vast system under roads, where it was the idea that everyone should be within a half-hour drive of a community college or university. Now, maybe that's overly ambitious. Maybe we don't need that much access. But it also means that that's a really great driver of education. Like, you don't have to go away. You can stay in Ohio, go to school in Ohio, and get a job in Ohio. And I think you're absolutely right. That the more that we make higher ed look bad in Ohio, that the bad publicity from this, the bad impacts, the negative impacts it's going to have, I think that's going to have an economic impact all around. As those universities contract, then those businesses contract, right? There's just not this people there. So it's a huge driver. It's a huge economic driver.
You may have said this earlier, but what are the numbers of petition signatures that you need and by what date?
Officially we need roughly 250,000. It's a little under that. It's like 248 something, but it's roughly 250,000 approved signatures. We obviously want to get more than that so that for the bad. So it's 250, and we are submitting them on the 25th of, is it this month? Are we the first? Yeah. So the 25th of this month is a submission. We're trying to make sure that everything's in at the latest by the 23rd so that we have some time to get those. These all have to be scanned. The way it works is you turn in the paper petition, but we also have to scan each individual petition and put them into a separate file. So you submit a flash drive along with the petition. So that's why we need them a couple of days early. But yeah, so everything has got to be in by the 25th, but we want the petitions done by around the 23rd. Yep.
I know you also need so many from a certain amount of counties.
Yes.
Whatever. So how many are you looking for Portage County?
We'll check here. EH1. I'm not sure the exact number. You have a.
I think Mandy said something like 2,000.
So to count as one of the 44, it would be 1,800, but Portage County is definitely going to be one that we need to be way above that number. So I'd say we probably want about 4,000 for Portage County.
Yeah.
So Portage County is kind of unique in that we've got a large university like Kent State here, smaller college in Hiram, and then we've got the medical school, which is also has one of the only dental schools, one of three in the state. Yet our community is not as many folks go to the college. And I think the economic argument was one of the things that I wanted to hear a little more about, so I appreciate you kind of sharing those things. Do you have any specifics on, you talked about that $68.9 billion that universities bring to Ohio as a whole. Are there any statistics from a county by county that we could share with people, share some of those a little closer to home concerns?
Yeah, I can look. I can look it up for you because I know they did the that was done by the Ohio Faculty Council. I think it was the OFC or the OIC, the Inter University Council. They were the one that commissioned it, so I can look and see if they broke it down by university or region for that. I don't have those specifics, so that was the overall numbers. But I believe that there were more. They pinpointed more precise numbers because they did have. There were at least 3 in a separate article based on that data. They did mention what individually Cleveland State, Kent State, and was it Cincinnati or Ohio State brought in. So they actually broke it down and said, it was so many billion for Kent. There was one, But I can look up and see if I can find those numbers for you. Customer about the discussion and the interchange and the interplay. I don't think that really what's going on at the universities is. I think this is actually an ideological push coming from Columbus. They have a supermajority. They don't have to listen to anyone. They don't have to listen to the 1,500 people who objected to this bill. They don't have to. There were 1,500 pieces of testimony the second time around, 800 the first, 200 people testified the first time during the House hearing on it. Senate hearing, they didn't even get to that many. They cut off. And then there were 20 people who were in favor of it. One of the people who were in favor of it was from a private Ohio university that isn't affected by SB1. So I don't know. Maybe that's just, maybe it's, there's a certain selection bias in there, But it seems to me that this is a very unpopular bill, but because Columbus doesn't have to listen to anybody with gerrymandering and other things, we don't have to listen, so we'll just put through whatever we ideologically like.
So with getting this referendum back, then the people would have the choice to vote.
People would have to vote on it.
Instead of the government in Columbus making the decisions for the people.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah.
And along those same lines, I'm sorry if you said this already, I just can't read the writing. Last step, when it goes to the ballot in November, is it 50% plus one right now?
Yep.
The way that it is? Okay.
Yep, just has to be a majority. So, and the one advantage of doing a referendum is that it goes on there as a no. So you're not voting for it to be repealed. You're voting no, it doesn't go into effect, which apparently is better for people. People feel more comfortable saying no to things than yes to things. Like yes is too risky. It's like when somebody comes and asks you, do you want to, do you want to come to this party I'm having? And I'm like, if you're the introvert type, you're like, gosh, I don't want to, saying yes is always the hard one. It's a commitment, but no apparently is easier. So that's the one advantage that this has. Now, again, once this passes, they could propose it again. What we've seen, or what tends to be the case, is that once something like this fails, they're a little gun shy for a while. So they wait a couple of years before they try to do something again. So our kind of hope is that that's what happens here. Pass it. The people say, yes, this is a bad thing for Ohio. Let's vote. Let's, not let this bill go into effect. And then we can work on sort of changing what's going on in Columbus. I mean, I would really like to see a more balanced legislature. I think that's the only thing that's going to save this, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. So my efforts are, let's start with these bills one at a time if we have to, to sort of put the brakes on this. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, thank you so much for coming out here. We'll get that video to you and get things out and,
I don't have to look at myself, so.
you do just a little bit of a dance and that's okay,
Thank you.
Good job, Doc.
Thanks.
Which university did you teach at?
Okay, let me get that.
I was at the University of Western Ontario.
Oh, Western.
So London, London, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, it's now called